Welcome to Land Language, the podcast transforming landscapes from toxic to regenerative. We're your host, Brit from Blueprint Earth,
and co-host Bethany from Bethany Rydmark Landscapes.
We explore beautiful, functional design through conversations with scientists, vendors, contractors, and designers who are changing the industry.
Whether you're in the field or at the drafting table, join us as we explore regenerative practices that care for people, place, and planet.
Let's dig in. Today's a special day. We get to talk across seas. We get to talk with Sarah Lebner of Cooee Architecture. And it may be interesting to you, like, why are we bringing an architect on to Land Language, the landscaping podcast around regenerative design and construction? Now, here's the thing. We all work together when it comes to a job and getting a project across the finish line. And it's all of our collective mindset and practice that really get us to a place where a client or a community has a finished built environment that supports the type of people that they are. And when we think inside to how a home or a building is constructed, and we think outside to how that flows into the garden, there really is a harmony between our worlds. And Sarah owns Cooee Construction. It is a very well-known sustainable architecture firm from Australia. And she's going to be giving a TED Talk here in just a month or so. And she comes with this mindset that is a little different than how we think in the US, mostly because our practices of how we build and construct in the US is just slightly different than how they do it and the challenges they have within the Australian framework of architecture. So we wanted to bring it to light, have a little conversation around what it means to be thinking about architecture in terms of sustainability and regeneration and practices of community, as well as get her opinion on how architecture and design relates back to the landscape. So Sarah, I'm honored that you would pick up the phone call thousands of miles away to say, yes, let's please chat. You've really built such a beautiful practice and so many incredible resources for the community of people who can't afford your architecture services and those who really need to be DIYers. And I was really touched by your effort in doing that. Can you share a little bit about your mission that let you create this big body of work and be an innovator in your field?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Britt. And thanks, Bethany, as well. Thank you for having me. And thanks to your listeners for checking in as well. I think I pursued a life in architecture because I loved creativity and science, and I've just always had a bit of a save the world complex. I just want to save the world. So I went off and studied architecture. It did really satisfy that creative problem solving, bringing in the science, working on these projects. I loved all that. But I think the frustration for me was that we learn a lot of the theories and approaches at university, but I was hungry for the data and the context. I wanted to know what changes, how much they costed, and what impact they had. I think that was always my frustration. We know that doing X is good, but how good is it? And what's the impact of that? So I was really lucky to land a job with a very unique practice. At the time, we had 3 directors, an architect, a builder, and a building scientist. And we looked at energy efficiency and environmental sustainability across the whole project. So from the very first concept, we were simulating it in the software and testing how it was performing and optimizing it. We were looking at the costing and how much different decisions costed. We would work really closely with the build team to see what the reality is of what's a pain and what's easy to achieve. We would test it as built for air leakage and thermal imaging. And then for many of those homes, we tracked the data afterwards to see the lived in reality. And now I feel not only did that just answered all of the things for me, but now I feel very much like I've had such an insight into a very unique education doing that for a decade. And I feel like it would be a crime to then only work with a handful of one-on-one clients each year in our practice. And that's why I feel such an urge then to do all of that public education and creation of other resources to share that information further.
I love that. I feel so aligned in that. And I know how big of a lift it is, especially when you're a tiny and mighty team, to be willing to cut out time that's not your highest ROI to fulfill that passion of just truly wanting to make a difference. Thanks for doing that. And high five from across the world.
Yes.
So when you've built these frameworks and you talk about it coming from a state of data, I sit further up on my seat and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's so curious because it means a lot of what you're prescribing isn't just theory. It's really understanding the why and what moves the needle.
Mm.
And I think all of that is really a meaningful practice to create trust with your clients because a lot of the times this is such a huge investment for them to renovate their home and to really look to their home as a safe and comfortable and beautiful and healthy space. And when you go to client meetings, I'm really curious, where do you see that people lean into you with that data, with that awareness, and see you as a really clear fit for them and probably for most people?
Yeah. Always it starts with values alignment, doesn't it? I guess clients, they start with their broad search. They're looking for a environmentally conscientious designer to bring onto their team, but we live in a world with so much greenwashing and it's really hard to understand not only who means it. I've not seen a design or construction firm that I don't think claims to be sustainable. So where do you even get started? I think that harnessing of the data and the background in using that brings a lot of credibility and trust, but also increasingly it's helping people navigate where the sweet spot is for them. I'm not sure if this is the same in the States, but in Australia, we almost have this increasing divide between existing housing stock and the premium sustainability construction. And while I love that those premium sustainability builds are happening, we need the leaders and we need the super high performance. They're just really not the best balance point for most people. So we really try to come in and say to people with the data, you really don't have to go to that premium nth degree. You can approach it very holistically and balanced and just look at optimization across a whole range of things, and you will achieve a home that matches your values. But increasingly, I'm realizing it's actually about giving people a home that matches their identity. Mm-hmm. People want to identify with living a certain way, and increasingly people, yes, we want to feel like we're living sustainably and have cheaper power bills, but increasingly I think it's also just about feeling safe and secure, and calm and healthy inside your home. Very core basic things that I think we forget that a lot of our existing housing stock has a lot of friction on.
I'm very curious, when you're meeting someone that maybe has gone through that first round of searching and they've narrowed down a list of folks and they come and show up to chat with you, how are you starting to frame those like in really tangible examples where it's not the very lofty or the very magnificent high-end extreme, but it really is just, I'm considering this for my family. This is what we have in mind. Tell us what you do. How are you framing that just to begin biting off like sincere and real topic? I like what you said a minute ago too about not taking things to the nth degree, but having it be an optimization that gets you progress in all of these different categories. So I'm fascinated to hear what that sounds like when you're first starting to talk about a project.
Yeah. We have, right from when I founded Cooee Architecture, we have these 18 intentions that are listed on the website, and they've become a real cornerstone for us. And I think people really identify with them because rather than saying that we prescribe to one camp of architecture approach, it gives us these 18 topics and we can adjust those depending on a client's context and budget. So yes, it still covers what we're aiming for on, say, energy efficiency star rating that we have over here in Australia, but then it will have other more holistic things like capture and reuse of rainwater, a really big one in Australia. Is it appropriate for the community that it's sitting in? Is it well connected to the landscape around, through to, is it limiting the disruption of natural systems around it? Is it aiming for a certain level of draft proofing? It really takes a holistic look at what we see as the 18 pillars to guide us on. And that really helps clients before we even speak to them. A lot of them have been able to see that and then self-identify as a great match for us because they want to work across those 18 things as well.
Would you say that within those 18 that you get clarity from them on which are the higher and lower priorities? Are they kind of pushing, pulling in different directions? And is that part of their homework to come and say to you, we generally align with this entire philosophy and here are the key things that are leading our decisions? Is that how that works?
Yeah, certainly. And it's quite easy to get a sense for a lot of those things the first time we meet with them. So a really good example on that one is floor size. One of our 18 intentions is that a family home should be less than 180 square meters, and that's just the house footprint, excluding the garage and carport. But we're not dictators on that. One of the most beautiful homes that we just finished pushes above that. All those guides are there is to make sure that we are having a really mindful, honest conversation about those things. And for them, in that instance, it pushed over because we were really focused on accessibility, multi-generational design on a very rural home that needed quite a lot of amenity. So yes, we talk through each of those, and some people are really keen to push some higher, some people not so much. So yeah, it's a scaffold for us to begin with and to listen to the client and then try and serve them across those however that suits them.
Serving the clients is always the way, right? So it makes me think about right now we're in fire season in the US and we haven't really gone outside for maybe 4 or 5 days because it's been so smoky where we are. And, you know, I know you're high in the mountains, but as a nation, you have been dealing with large scale fires as well. And so I imagine designing for defense there's a landscape aspect to that, of course. And then from your perspective, I'm so curious, not just like fireproofing a house, because I think there's some basic rules there, but from your innovative perspective, do you have some really interesting things that you're like, hey, architecture community, let's put our hands up for these situations too?
Certainly. And look, we are near the mountains, but we're in a very bushfire prone area. In 2020, 2020 was the year that half of Australia was on fire. I think you'd all remember.
Yeah.
I laugh because what else can you do? Our town was hit really hard then. We weren't living here then, but my partner's family home and farm burnt. And my partner and his family stayed to help my parents defend. It never came to that. And then this year, so that's 6 years later, our community was hit again by a bushfire and lost farms and homes and massive state forest animal wildlife impact this year as well. So very bushfire prone. And also being regionally focused, we are often dealing with people living in rural areas. Even when I worked in Canberra, the suburbs of Canberra burnt in the 2000s and it was quite horrific. So bushfire's been a very big part of my practice. And I've been to the Australian Bushfire Building Conference a few times. And there's probably 2 points of interest. An American follower of ours reached out recently and I said, I'd love to ask you as well, what building standards do you have for bushfire? Because after there were some bad fires in the 2000s, they developed this bushfire building standard that we have that is actually holding up quite well. So we have different ratings for a site and then there's different levels that you need to build the home for. And that starts off with quite simple things like ember defensiveness and certain materials. But what I have learnt is there's also a lot we can do that's not part of what you can legislate, as you would know. So it's very easy to create rules around how a building is built, but actually how you design the building and the site is probably even more important. So I've done a lot of work on design for defensiveness, which is a very hot topic because all of the authorities will run the line, leave and leave early. But the firm reality is, in a regional area like this, in 2020, when resources were spread so thin, most of those fires would have spread far further if it wasn't for landowners defending on their property. And a lot of farmers are very well set up to defend on their property, very experienced. A lot of them volunteer with our local fire services. So, in fact, in high school here in Australia, a lot of the kids do like a firefighting unit, which I think also made a big impact in our town in 2020. So there's a lot of inherent knowledge. So then you're not talking about a building that's standing there defending itself. You're talking about how are we helping people have a defendable site. And that's when landscape comes into it quite a lot as well. You want to have nice access. We're looking at certain plants. We're looking at where the upslopes are, where the wind directions are, areas that might be irrigated or parts of the garden that you keep with a higher moisture. There's rules about not having a lot of trees close together because they have to assume the worst case scenario, that it's a dry year and no one's watering their trees. But if you actually go along and speak to all the landscapers that are experts in bushfire design, there's plenty of trees that can assist in that case. So looking at working that right through the whole site to give you your best chances of, defending the home and being resilient.
One of the things that was really interesting to me, and I used to live in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, and in Colorado for a very long time, you weren't able to harvest your water because as soon as the rain dropped, I know your eyes went big when I told you that last time. When a raindrop hits the ground, it's owned by a rancher, a farmer, whoever owns the water rights. So what hits your ground is required to go to the watershed. And I always found that to just be insane. And I'm glad the rules have shifted. But in Oregon, we view water as something that we typically have to manage because there's so much of it in the Pacific Northwest. And in the summer, there's none. And so we have this interesting push and pull with how we store water. And I'm just curious, why are there these rules of how you actually sequester your water in Australia? And what is that useful for?
Yes. Yeah. And yes, I only learnt recently about these water collection rules in America, and it absolutely broke my brain. In Australia, it's very much the opposite. You are mandated to collect your water in most jurisdictions around Australia because obviously we're a very water scarce nation. I remember I was in Canada once as a child, and there was what's the big canyon that the main river on the west of the Columbia River goes through?
The gorge.
Yes, the gorge, yes. And the tour guide said more water flows through this gorge at any moment than flows out of the continent of Australia.
Wow.
Yeah, that doesn't that put it in perspective? No, I've never been back and fact check that, but that's what the tour guide said. We are very water scarce. So yeah, we're legislated to new projects, and even significant renovations have to install rainwater collection to assist our resources. And sorry, Brit, what was the other part of your question?
I'm curious how it's utilized.
Yeah. So in some jurisdictions, you have to have your rainwater tank, and you have to connect it to the toilet and laundry points and garden taps. And then I would say that's fairly standard across the board, even for jurisdictions that don't enforce that. And then we do, in various levels of drought, as I'm sure you do as well, we have different water restrictions that come to play. So often people will want to have water on site so that they can keep their veggie garden alive when restrictions get down to not being able to use water on gardens or just hand watering. And then it also plays into the bushfire. So depending on your bushfire level, you have to have a static source of water on the site with a firefighting connection. So at our house on the farm, we have to have 40,000 litres reserved always with a firefighting connection on it for a bushfire event.
We negotiate with clients a lot of the times. Okay, it would be really great if it's two views. One is let's sequester it and move it through the garden from your downspouts into swales and rain gardens so we can actually utilize it. So we aren't using fresh water to irrigate plants as much in the summer. And then the second is if you are going to harvest your rainwater, it's going to be the size of a Suburban, like a giant SUV amount of water to be able to store enough for you to actually have a meaningful amount to get you through the summers. And I'm just curious from your guys' perspective, what's the scale that you guys store rainwater at from a typical residence? Like these.
Yeah, in Canberra, where I used to be, which had quite good progressive rules around it, the minimum was a certain size of tank or 50% of your roof, depending on the block size. So for the smaller blocks, I think it was a 5,000 litre tank. Most of the blocks we were working on would be mid or large. I think you need 10,000 from memory. And then out in rural areas, our project is not connected to the water grid. So we've got 40,000 litres at the house and then 160,000 litres on a big shed. So that's aiming to be completely self-sufficient with that. And then I'd say we get anywhere in between.
Fascinating. Thanks for deep diving with me. It's just so curious to me because we have completely different views on it in nations and regionally too.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah. Even regionally, like thinking about, I grew up in Southern California and Arizona, and like people had lawns and rose gardens in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Pacific Palisades, California, and like Los Angeles. And it's just a bit shocking.
Yeah. We even have jurisdictions now where, like the tool we use in my state in New South Wales, you have to specify how much irrigated lawn you have, how much irrigated garden you have, and then there's some calculation that happens in the back that tells you whether you're storing enough rainwater. And there's also diverging here, but also rules coming in around trees and trees canopy. So in Canberra, in the city, they're really working on tree canopy. So we've even got to make sure that we're planting certain deep-rooted trees on every site.
I'm going to go geek out and find those stats because I'm so interested in that data calculator.
Yeah.
So cool. Thanks for sharing. So when it comes down to just how you show up in my mind, how we show up in landscape, we show up with this set of principles and data that's like, this is why you build soil. This is why you sequester water on your site. This is why you use native plants. And some carbon footprint versions of what that all equates to in the end is my goal right now. It's what I'm building so that we have data that shows here's the output of it. But I'm curious, when you show up, like, where do you feel like the industry is kind of getting it wrong versus like where you're like, hey guys, like when I think about soil building, that's where I think our industry is getting it wrong. So I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think of that is something you would be like, hey, everyone, let's go this way?
Yeah. So I might set the context first to explain that we have this amazing tool in Australia called NAPHERS. It's our National Home Energy Rating Scheme. It's built by the CSIRO, which is our big science body. And because it's a national tool, it cops a lot of flack. Actually, when you look at it, it's really unique internationally. I think it's one of the best tools around the world, I've heard, as long as you know what it is doing. People expect too much from it. So it simulates, you model the house exactly as you've designed it, the size and the walls and the materials and the window sizes and the eaves and the direction it's facing. And then it will simulate it with hourly weather data from 69 climate zones across Australia. So Australia, much the United States, has many different climates, but they break it down into 69. So, and they've now adjusted that 30 years of hourly data as well with a bit of a forward-looking climate change trajectory. So what it gives us is a very insight to how thermally efficient a home is with its exact design on its exact site. And I love it because it connects those really back to basics theories like solar passive design, shading, following the sun, with a tool that can tell us how we are harnessing it. So where I am and most of the southern areas of Australia is just perfect for solar passive design because we still get quite hot summers. We had, as not a surprise to anyone, everyone thinks of Australia as hot. We had a heat wave this year with a week of 40 plus here, which was unlike anything I'd experienced before. But then here where I live, I can see snow on the distant mountains today. Or Canberra, you can get down to -8. So big swings. But we can harness those sun angles. Just in case anyone who's listening doesn't know, the sun changes its angle in the sky between summer and winter quite significantly. For us, it's in the north. It comes lower in the north. For you, it's lower in the south. So designing for that in mind gives us not only automatic shading during summer, but a lot of free heating in winter. And I often say to people, ignoring that and getting it wrong is like deciding to park your car in the sun for the rest of your life. It's just, why wouldn't you pay attention to that? We're all happy to drive around a car park and do 5 laps to find the shady car spot in summer, and then we ignore where we're doing our house. My main frustration is that if we learn from that tool, but also hybridize it with other things that we know, there's some really low-hanging fruit and gains to be had. Now, the issue with that amazing tool that we have is it doesn't take size into consideration. It's a per square meter rating. So if your home's twice as big but has the same rating, it'll use twice as much energy to heat and cool. It doesn't care how you then choose to heat and cool it. So you could have a really great rated home, but then heat it really inefficiently. And at the moment, it doesn't take into consideration draft proofing. And we know that if a home's really leaky or it's well draft proofed, affects its performance a lot as well. So the great thing is we have these new innovators in Australia that we work with who have built a platform that now pulls all of that stuff in. And it's a real game changer because it allows us to show the benefits across all of those factors. And for me, it's been a game changer because they finally have the visuals and the data to show people. So, for example, the New South Wales government recently sent out a heap of assessors across the state and tested all the existing homes. And the majority of homes are rating at 2 stars or a little bit lower. And our current minimum standard for new builds is 7 stars. So that's the context. But not only are those homes rating low thermally, they're also really drafty, and they're also being heated and cooled with really inefficient systems. So painting, my frustration with that industry is that all the expertise and knowledge in energy efficient, sustainable housing, and it's understandable, we're all focused on this high end part. We're often doing the new builds, we're doing the really big budget renos, we might be in the sort of really premium. I'm not sure if passive house standard is a known thing over where you are, that sort of space, which can be a bit alienating for people that are down in these inefficient 2-star homes and they might only have $50,000 to spend on a reno. But that's where retrofit can just be so successful. Our first home in Canberra was a 90s brick veneer home. We spent $9,000. That was in 2015. So now it's about $1 million. Maybe. No, maybe $15,000 now. We just focused on, we did all our draft proofing ourselves. We got good window coverings. We made sure there was no gaps in the ceiling insulation. We pumped in wall insulation. We switched our old inefficient electric heater over to a heat pump. I think that's all we did. And we worked out that our payoff period for that work was probably 5 years in the extra comfort and lower bills that brought us. So that's all very, very easily doable things. And I would love to see our industry think of ways that they can educate into that space. And that's where we come back to what you were alluding to earlier, Brit. It doesn't mean we have to give up the projects that we love and make our bread and butter off. The majority of Cooee's work is still the new builds or the bigger budget renovations. And that's where we learn and test and really sink our teeth into everything and go right down to levels of detail. But our business has also then innovated to have other resources available for people to access that knowledge without having to be a big one-on-one kind of client. So for us, we have the Cooee Retrofit method, which is specifically scaffold and resource for people that might have $500 to $250K with something they want to do for their home. It gives ideas of people at different budgets what you should tackle first as a priority. It has video walkthroughs of 2 typical Australian homes of me saying, here's what I do and look at this. And then afterwards they can come into a Facebook group so they can ask any more questions if they have it along the way. And other practices are starting to do similar things, whether it's just a early vibe check consult on site, and we do that as well. We'll just come out for 2 hours and our brain is yours for 2 hours and ask all your burning questions and we'll set you in the right direction. I've seen similar with builders. Some builders are doing a similar service, but we really need to think of ways that we can spread our knowledge and services further, but of course, while keeping our businesses thriving.
I think about that so much. And I know like when we got to hang out for a little bit last week, I was like, that's inspiring me to think about that deeper, because it is important to have profit and to have revenue, to treat your team in a way that is a livable existence and to allow your team to thrive, as well as yourself and as business owners, and to also say, okay, where can we pivot? So I really loved your framework where you've created this offering for people to be able to buy the guide or be a part of the Facebook group or get in where they can get in. Because when you came to the moment where you were invited to do a TED Talk, it's because of literally finding that level of importance. And I know it's probably not your hugest revenue generator, but it's because you care. And the hope is that it does have a meaningful, it's not a net loss, but it's something that I think is very curious to me to say, okay, how could we do that better? Because so often we end up with problems like people's downspouts are just letting out at their foundation, and their basements are wet, or their foundations have a crack in it, or there's these older homes that have porous foundations. And it's literally like, we just need to talk about grading and water diversion or harvesting or sequestration so that we can actually help you protect this asset from getting moldy or the walls becoming compromised. And so that's where we relate in a large way, where I feel like we have a lot of value we can add, where people could take on helping themselves with just some really simple direction. And that's the one moment that I really love to champion here is stormwater management in the Pacific Northwest, because we have what we call atmospheric rivers because we have so much water.
Wow. Yeah.
It's the opposite.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
Right? It's so cool. That's why I'm like storing the size of a Suburban. It's just so much water. And there's this interesting aspect too, because it's as we create these content and these guides and this information like that for listeners too, it's like everything is so regional as well. What your region needs versus what our region needs versus what the desert needs and the ocean front. It's all quite site specific, but there's also these aspects that are like the continuity. Like when you're like passive design, solar design, like those are, I'm sure, quite similar based on where you are within region. I guess I don't know. Is it quite similar?
Yeah, I assume so. Yeah.
I mean, when you say that, it makes me think, though, of the benefit of each of us in our smaller regions, approaching our practice and its philosophy wherever we're functioning in whichever native landscapes and native materials and, collection of local contractors and just the whole construction world around us to a certain size footprint where we have a voice. We have the opportunity to help tailor these things because there are universal messages around conserving resources and using them well and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the way that it might be applied in one region
absolutely
can be different. And I, again, putting myself in the shoes of an average homeowner or someone who is, trying to make sense of what, if I'm in my jaded, cynical self, like you go online and you're just blasted with a fire hose of everyone who has advice for you all day, every day. And at a certain point, how do you even begin to filter? So when you become the presence in your community at a scale where you're recognizable and they can trust that you have something to say about this place, where you have some accountability to your clients and to the building industry around you and the folks that know you, it seems like there's a really potent opportunity. It sounds like you've done a great job in your region establishing yourself as that. And it encourages me and likewise our listeners as well, wherever we find ourselves, to take that piece of our practice and try to find out how we can put it into that bite-sized, digestible, accessible mode and share it with, it doesn't have to go out and reach the ends of the earth for it to matter. In fact, it almost matters more deeply to reach the people right here, the folks that are just beyond the limit of our kind of ideal client of what large project we might sign on next month. But actually, there's this whole network of people around us. And think about my neighborhood where I live, or places where people just they might not know because they might not know. And reaching out to get a full-fledged education in architecture or landscape is far beyond. And maybe reaching out even to hire professional services at an extreme level is far beyond the season. But we could have a collective input across a lot of different, households and landscapes if we can dial it down to just that scale. So I'm in real time, I'm thanking you for that, because it just reminds me, we do have a lot of insight and knowledge. And, Brit's a great example of that. She's constantly preaching to the folks around here around how to really thoughtfully manage the water that is falling on your site. What are you going to do with it? Not only to protect yourself from damage, but also to capture it and use it well for a benefit and an asset, and interpret for people why the benefit of that is so rich, not just for the human folks on the site, but also for the microbes in the soil and the creatures in the forests that are coming down to, land on that pebble and have access to a little shallow pool of water, whatever it is. We get to be the storytellers to help make these systems make a little bit more sense, and people can implement them on a bit of a scale. Like you said, with your house, if you put $9,000 into what check this box, that one, the other, do these basic things, and it starts to make an overall change for the benefit. And if you have the data, this is exactly like, where I maybe have less data at my fingertips and I'm inspired by your examples. But if you have that data and can prove it out and say, all right, in 5 years' time, here's where all of these things pencil, and it's not a ginormous project with a lot of zeros on the end and a big giant, lifetime cost or whatever, but it's really, okay, here's our stewardship in our family's life and in our home's life for the years that we're here. We can do these pieces and feel really good about it. And so thank you for that encouragement for all of us in our fields.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Beth. And I often speak to people who are saying, oh, but what would I talk about? Because people can access that information somewhere else, right? And we live in an age where you can access every bit of information you could ever want. But that's exactly why people are hungry for people that they know and trust, even if it's just in an online presence. They want to hear it from them. And then what we also find being in a certain region is a lot of people are following us who might not otherwise be interested in what we're doing. They're just following because they're from a local community and they're really fine. They always stop me in the street and they're like, I had no idea about that. So it's all worth sharing. And the other thing I often say to practitioners starting out, because they're worried that they're not the authority on a certain thing, and I often say, don't frame it as you're the authority, frame it as you're learning about that thing too. We had a whole saga on our building blog while I was learning way too much about every bath that was available and what I was going to do. And it was useful because all of these architects and builders were sending me suggestions and tips and have you thought about this? And then I would share that back, and people just want to be part of the conversation. It's very human to be attracted to storytelling and relationships. So yeah, it's just share and share generously, I think.
Yeah. I appreciate about your social media. It's so educational. And I watch myself just kind of like scrolling through it and clicking on things and learning I'm one of those people, and I love that. And it makes me get curious. And for our listeners too, the conversation we're having in this moment right now within landscape architecture, landscape design, and architecture is, how do we get together to make sure that we're making a better project together? Because a lot of times architects are brought into the room, and then permit drawings are probably done. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, landscape, afterthought. And we're like, if only we could have used that stormwater, if only we could have moved that door for this specific. And I'm just curious from your perspective, how do you get curious about the harmony of working with people like us?
Yeah. And I see there's a future thing that's going to happen more. It's only just starting to happen with building and design. I think there's Amelia Lee, undercover architect in Australia, has a wonderful podcast as well. And she's really championed educating builders and clients and designers on, she calls it the PAC process, paid as consultant process, and bringing them in early into the design process. And what's been really fascinating for us is that there's been builders where have been trying to do that, particularly complex renovations where we want that insight earlier. But bringing them in, they weren't really sure how to be involved in a productive way early in the process. And we're trying to direct them on how to do it, and it's very awkward. And now we're finding builders that have done some actual training on how to do that. It's just a game changer. If we turn up, we know we're respecting each other's boundaries, but also contributing really productively, making the time for that in their business, charging for that as a service so that it's not this annoying thing that gets left behind. And that's become a real game changer. And I would love to see the same kind of thing happen with landscape coming in, because I still feel, yes, we would love to bring a landscape designer in early on this project, but often we get them there and it's, oh, if you haven't worked that out yet, do the site cut and then talk to us later. And they're just used to coming on later in that stage, perhaps. And it would be wonderful to rethink that business framework and how we collaborate so that there's almost this different service early on. It's like, no, I'm not asking you to draw the plants right now. Can you come on site and we'll have a discussion about the water and the drainage and the site cut? And that's just a early service piece. And then we'll come back to you later on when we've got that worked out and we'll do a bit more collaboration further down. So I think my advice to practitioners who want to get involved in that is to really try to articulate what that service would look like and to define it and have it sitting there as a separate thing. I think all of us can be really guilty of forgetting what we don't know and assuming that everyone knows what we do and what we're available for. But yeah, I think we just have to articulate it so clearly to people and say, hey, no, I can come in and do this thing and this is how it will look. And it would just be a game changer.
Yeah. I think it's something I really appreciate, that mindset and that framework of the pack and getting everyone just in the consulting phase at the beginning so that as the light bulbs go off, they're invited to be a part of the group of thought leaders that are really helping move a project forward. Because we do, like you're saying, like the site cut, like we have such a different perspective because of how we literally work outside, like inside out and then outside in. It's such a meaningful context. And I'm on 2 projects right now where this is the first time that landscape has led the project. And the architects were both like, you first and then we come, but it was like the first kind of pack.
Cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. Actually, I've never been in this situation before, but it happened because the first time the architect said, hey, you need to go talk to Brit first and then come back to me, because this is really this is a relation to 2 volcanoes before we decide on what happens with the building and how the landscape relates to them, which is pretty cool. But I really have valued from these couples' experiences that day one, there's landscape at the front as well as architecture. And then what it's done for us is we both know exactly what we need on the site survey. I'll ribbon up the trees and I'll be like, when the survey happens, we don't have to have the client hire the contractor back, the surveyor back to go and tag these things again. We're doing one site survey that's based on everyone's need because the concept has been curated with all of us in the room. So it's ultimately saved the client money and just fees.
Yeah.
Whereas another project right now, I'm after the architect is done and I'm like, hey, there isn't room for people to take off their shoes in this day spa before they come in. And so we're having to move buildings, but you've already got permit drawings ready that you've paid the civil for, and we're going to have to move plumbing because we can't actually get everyone's shoes in this space. And they're like, shoot, that's money out the door. And I'm like, yeah.
I definitely agree. We often say to clients, yes, you are paying a perceived extra fee to have the builder involved early during construction, but every project where we have done it, I think it pays for itself just in efficiency and insight and decisions we're able to make along the way. And even I think there's such a value to having an established relationship and understanding of the project before the builder goes to quote it. So I often say to people, it's a chance for the builder to really understand the job, They get to know you and what your expectations are. So they're not coming in with all this contingency worried about you're a really high maintenance client or whether there's these unknown difficulties or they haven't really had time to understand this part of the project or know what our expectations are. So we might have a nominal screen or something and we've had that chat about, oh, we think it might be something like this and can you put a sum around that? So yeah, it's on projects where particularly complex renovations, it is just super valuable. But I would say that nothing is black and white, and there's also plenty of new builds where we feel like we've learned enough from all the consultants we work with that we wouldn't bring them in the same level. So it's very much a context-based approach, and I think that's where you need your project leader, whether that is a project manager, an architect, a landscape architect, to just be open to finding and putting together the best process and to be adaptive and bring together the right people at the right time.
Thanks for being our ally in that. We need more of you.
My pleasure.
Sarah, I want to ask you about this my first architecture job aspect of your practice.
Yeah, look, it is not so much a thing anymore, but to share that education. So this is while I was still working at my former practice, Lighthouse Architecture and Science. I wrote a book first, 101 Things I Didn't Learn in Architecture School and Wish I'd Known Before My First Job. And it's really just a quick glance guide at 101 things that are handy to know if you're coming out into the industry. And it takes it back to basic things. So there's so much that we forget we know. So it really explains it to the graduates so you don't have to ask the silly questions. And we found it was a great guide for clients as well. Another architect said to me, I give all my clients a copy.
Amazing.
So that they don't feel like they have to ask these silly questions. What is a fascia? So I wrote that, and then it was published just before 2020 when we had quite strict COVID lockdowns in Australia. And so I set up an online mentoring platform at the time, my first architecture job. And a lot of students and graduates really connected with that because it gave them a place to come learn. We brought in trades so they could still almost get site experience style knowledge, even though they weren't allowed out to construction sites. So in some ways, even though I'd planned to do that anyway, the timing worked out really well. And it was a really valuable outlet and cohort for a few years. I did close that down when I started Cooee Architecture because I couldn't have two work babies. They were competing for each other. But it was a really lovely moment in time. And now there's almost this sort of cohort out there doing amazing things. And sometimes they reach me and they're like, I was in my first architecture job, and they're all off doing wonderful things. So yeah, that was a trial run in some ways of testing, educating and communicating and creating these resources and a passive income model that I've then been able to bring a lot of that learning into now what we're doing with Cooee and those side resources.
That's so wonderful. It's like another example of that flower just like flinging the wildflower seeds out. Like you've planted all of these other inspirations in the form of young architects rather, but inspiring them to go out. And so even though you're busy doing your work in your world, you have these other trails of your work kind of going off and you don't even get to see the full effect, but you know it's out there. It's so lovely. I love that part of community and what it means to really intensely give yourself to those.
And coming back. I mean, they're doing amazing things and now often it benefits me. They're like, oh, you're up here, come look at what we're doing.
Totally.
And,
I love that.
Fantastic.
So I have to ask, there's this word cooee, and I'm like, oh, that's a fun word. Can you tell me? I know we should probably have started there, but I still want to know.
Cooee, that's okay. Yeah. Cooee is a very special word. It's a very special Australian word. So it originates from a couple of Aboriginal Australian languages, and it's one of only a handful of words that were adopted by European settlers and have survived into mainstream Australian English today. There's less than 20 of these words that have worked into our everyday language that we speak that have Australian Indigenous origin. So cooee is used to call out across a distance to someone. So it's like, cooee is how you do it. And I loved that because I was moving back home to the family farm and starting a regional practice, and we wanted to call out to regional people across a different distance to work together towards low carbon homes and fulfilling lives within them. And Cooee has been used for various other uses across time. There's also a history with the Cooee marches, which was a big recruitment for the war. So yeah, a very strong, culturally strong Australian word.
Right. Final question. When you find yourself in a state of challenge, how do you call yourself back to yourself?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I don't think this one was on the
It's
notes.
not on the
Brit.
notes. You were not prepped for this.
How do I call myself back to myself?
How do you cooey yourself back?
Yeah, what a great question. I think it always to get outside. I think the day I decided I was ready to move back home, my husband was always ready. The day I decided I was ready, I was swimming in the river. So we live here on the Murray River, which is one of the biggest, well, the Murray-Darling is the biggest river system in Australia. And you look up to one side, you can swim in it, you can drink it. It's beautiful fresh water. You look up to one side, you see the snowy mountains. And it's just such a peaceful place. Floating in that river is my happy place. So whenever I get a bit lost or hung up, or you go down rabbit holes in your brain, it is just to get outside, have a swim, climb a mountain, ride a horse, and just remember who you are and where you are and what really matters. Give yourself your brain some boredom to organize its thoughts, and then that usually sorts it out.
Thanks for entertaining that and sharing. So lovely.
It's my pleasure.
This has been a treat to have you. I truly appreciate your candor, your wisdom, the collection of pieces you've made that scatter out into the world through your own care, but also your ability to be an educator. And from afar, really just honor you and what you're doing. And like I said, when I met you the first time, I was like, I don't even know you, but I'm so proud of you.
So lovely.
And it really is true. So I appreciate you taking the time to have dialogue with us and to layer how our fields relate and how they walk side by side. And just really am grateful. So thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And it's such an honor to be introduced to a new group of listeners and just have this chance to speak about things that I'm so passionate about. So yeah, very sincere thanks to you too.
Where do we find you online if we want to go and follow your adventure?
Yeah, Cooee Architecture, Cooee, cooeearchitecture.com.au. I'm also very active on Instagram and Facebook.
See you there.